So let's begin the last part of lecture 5. So here we'll be looking at a couple of models, simple models, to try and understand how do peer-to-peer lenders fare with respect to traditional banks in terms of their screening and lending incentives. Okay, so the models I'll discuss today are based on this paper, this working paper by Estrada and Zamora. I'll provide this paper as part of today's update, and the models are pretty simple to understand, and that's one of the reasons why I've chosen these models to give you further information on how peer-to-peer lenders can actually make a difference. So we'll start with a very simple model, the first model, wherein there's only a single bank operating within the economy, meaning the financial system is dominated by just one single bank, a traditional bank. And we'll first try and derive expressions to understand what determines a bank's incentives to screen prospective loan applications, meaning prospective borrowers, and how a bank is able to screen borrowers to resolve any potential adverse selection problems. Okay, so as part of its screening process, the bank has to make two decisions. So let's say there are a number of loan applications, a number of projects that are to be funded within the economy. And obviously a bank, given its limited resources, will not be able to screen all loan applications that it receives. So the first decision that the bank has to make is what percentage of all loan applications K is it willing to screen or able to screen? And secondly, out of this K percentage that the bank has screened, it funds only a subset of these loans applications that have been screened. So the second question that the bank has to answer is, out of the percentage K of loan applications that are screened, how many loans L are actually issued? Okay. In both the models that we'll discuss as part of this lecture, we'll assume that there is perfect screening, meaning the bank is able to determine the quality of the loan, that is, whether it's a good quality or a bad quality loan, with certainty. All right, because information is freely available to assess the quality of a project. Now, let's say the economy consists of certain low risk and high risk projects, and that the share of low risk projects within the economy is given by lambda. Okay, now the assumption again here is that a loan is taken out in order to fund a given project, right? And every project has a certain probability of success attached to it, given by PI, where I can be either a low risk project denoted by L or a high risk project denoted by H. Now, once a loan is issued to fund a project, the expected profit from that project is given by this expression pi I, which is the expected money received from the project, the expected return from the project, which is given by the product of the probability of success of that project and the return earned by that project, minus 1. 1 refers to the initial investment made using that loan. Okay. Now, we also make some further assumptions that obviously the probability of success of a low risk project is greater than the probability of success of a high risk project. The expected return from a low risk project is obviously higher than the expected return from a high risk project, but in raw terms, the return from a high risk project is greater than the return from a low risk project, because in raw terms, obviously higher risk means a higher return, right? But in expected terms, the return from a low risk project is always greater than the return from a high risk project, the expected return. What does this entail? Now, we also say that the cost of screening for a bank is given by this expression K square Z, where K obviously represents the number of loans applications that are screened. And the reason we use this expression is because we assume that the cost of screening increases as the number of loan applications increases, right? Because obviously as the number of loan applications increases, the bank has to expend more resources to process those loan applications. And Z here refers to the unit cost of screening. So Z here is the cost of screening a single loan application. Okay? Now, we assume that because the bank is conservative, the bank will only fund the low risk projects that are available, that are screened and that are available. So the number of loans issued by the bank is given by L is K times lambda, where L is again one of the questions that we need to answer, which is the number of loans granted. K represents the percentage of loans that are screened by the bank, and lambda represents the percentage of the loans that are of low risk in nature. So the product of K times lambda represents the number of loans applications that the bank screens, and the product of that with lambda shows the number of low risk loan applications that were screened and funded by a loan, right? And let's say we use another term called R, which represents the interest rate paid by the bank on deposits. Now, given this set of information, the bank's profit function can be expressed in this format. So the first term here represents L times pi L, which is the number of loans issued and the net profit earned by the bank for providing loans to those low risk projects, right? The second term here represents the deposit interest rate, the aggregate deposit interest rate the bank pays based on all the loans that are issued. And the third part here obviously represents the cost borne by the bank, the aggregate cost borne by the bank for screening K number of applications. Now you can replace L as K times lambda and you get an expression of this form, right? Once you differentiate, now what is the question here? We want to understand what is the optimal number of loan applications that a bank will be able to screen. So to understand that, we can simply differentiate this equation with respect to K, and what we obtain, and then once we equate that to 0, we get an expression of this form. By the way, because I don't have access to a Surface computer, because we don't have access to the premises of the university, and also because we don't have any other forms to derive the expression, what I've done is for both these models, I'm also going to attach a scan PDF on MIT-UIB that will show you the steps by which some of these expressions are derived. So if you have any trouble understanding how we go from this expression to determining the optimal number of loans, please make sure to read through that scan PDF in order to understand the steps taken to arrive at this expression. Okay, so when we differentiate the bank's profit function with respect to K and equate that to 0, we get the optimal number of loans that are screened by the bank, and that is given by this expression here. What about the optimal number of loans that are funded by the bank eventually? Like I said, that is explained by this expression. So if you derive the optimal number of loans that are screened and call them as Km and multiply that with lambda, we get this expression here. What can you make out of this expression? This expression, either this or this, clearly shows that as lambda improves, meaning as the share of low risk projects in the economy improves, the bank is more incentivized. It has more incentives to screen and lend more loans. What about pi L, the expected profit from low risk projects? As pi L improves, that also incentivizes the bank to screen more loan applications and issue more loans. What about the deposit interest rate? If R increases, meaning if the bank faces pressure to provide more interest rate on its deposits, then naturally its incentives to screen more loans and also to issue more loans goes down. Now this is a very basic model, and this is just intended to give you an idea of the screening and lending incentives of a bank when it faces certain costs. Okay. Now moving on, let's expand this model a bit and try and introduce a new P2P platform into this equation, into this framework. The idea is now there is a new P2P platform that emerged, which is actively competing with the existing bank for access to loans, and it wants to capture a market share on its own. Now, let's say the number of loans screened by the bank is given by KA, and the number of loans screened by the P2P platform is given by KB. All right. I mean, these are the share of loans, and K here follows from the same terminology that used in the previous model. Now, if you express the number of loans screened by the bank and the P2P platform as a Venn diagram, you can differentiate the types of loans screened into 4 different categories. So here, group 1 represents the share of the number of loan applications that are screened by both the bank and the P2P platform, which is obvious, right? Within an economy, if a borrower is indifferent between obtaining a loan from a bank or a P2P platform, some of them would file a loan request with both of them just to see where they managed to get a loan. And that represents group 1. What about group 2? This represents the loan applications that were received by the bank, but not necessarily by the P2P platform. Similarly, group 3 represents loan applications that are screened only by the P2P platform and not by the bank. Whereas group 4 represents loan applications that were not screened by either the bank or the P2P platform. So this generally comprises, these 4 groups of loan applications generally comprise the aggregate types of loan requests in an economy. Okay. Now, again, assume that even within this duopoly, where the financial system is dominated by one bank and one P2P platform, we once again assume that both these intermediaries will only prefer to fund low-risk projects. And let's say, as I said, the borrower, for their part, are indifferent. Whether they receive the loan from the bank or the peer-to-peer platform doesn't really matter to them, because we assume that the interest rate provided on a loan is the same in either case. So how do we derive the profit function of bank A in this situation? The profit function for bank A can be given by this expression here. So the first term here, KA/KB, lambda by 2 times pi L, represents the bank's profit from loans issued to group 1. Okay, loans issued to group 1. What is the assumption we make here? Here, under group 1, loan requests are submitted to both bank and the platform, and we assume that each of these processes the loans and funds half of them, because the bank and the P2P platform compete with each other. So KA/KB represents the product of their respective screenings. Pi L represents the profit from a low-risk project, because only low-risk projects get funded. And lambda pi 2 represents the share of loans that are screened and funded by the bank A. What about the second expression? Second expression represents the group of loans funded by the bank alone, and that is given by the product of KA times the share of loans that are not screened by the platform, meaning KA times 1 minus KB, and again lambda is the share of low-risk projects within the loan applications that were screened that are funded, and pi L represents the profit from those low-risk projects that the bank earns. Again, RLA is the total interest rate paid to the depositors, and the assumption again here is that the bank will pay out all its deposits as loans, so no regulatory requirements or something like that apply here. What about the last expression? That represents the aggregate screening costs borne by the bank for processing all these loan applications. Similarly, the profit function for the P2P platform is given by this expression. I guess based on the explanation given here, it is more or less straightforward for you to compute the expression given under equation 2. Now we make a simple assumption here. That is, because the P2P platform has less operating costs, right? That's been the main argument throughout this lecture. Because P2P platforms expend less resources, they have less operating costs, and they require less time to screen prospective borrowers, and therefore their operating costs, CB, are much greater than the operating costs of the bank. So therefore we have this inequality where ZA, the screening costs of bank A, are significantly greater than the screening costs of the peer-to-peer platform. Under this argument, the number of loans issued by the bank is given by this expression. The first term here is once again referring to the number of loans issued under group 1. That's represented by the product of KA times KV times lambda by 2, because we assume that only half of all the loans in group 1 are funded by the bank and the rest is funded by the peer-to-peer platform. This second term represents the number of loans funded by the bank alone and not by the peer-to-peer platform. That's given by the product of KA, meaning the share of loans processed by the bank, and 1 minus KB represents the share of loans not processed by the P2P platform and not by the bank. And therefore, that's the KA times 1 minus KB represents the share of loans that are processed by the bank alone and not by the P2P platform, times lambda represents the share of low risk projects out of all these loan applications that are screened that are ultimately funded by the bank A in group 2. So this collective expression represents the share of number of loans issued by the bank both within group 1 and group 2. Okay, and similarly you can compute the number of loans issued by the P2P platform to group 1 and group 3 borrowers. All right, now what is the objective here? Just like in model 1, we want to determine what is the optimal number of loans that are loan applications that are screened by the bank and the P2P platform. So we apply the same methodology that we used in the previous model and differentiate equation 1, this equation, with respect to KA. Okay, and then we equate it to 0. By the way, I have derived the steps in, here in the scan PDF, so please be sure to refer to them in case you need further clarification. So if you once you differentiate equation 1 with respect to KA, you get an expression of this form, and when you group similar terms from this equation, you get an expression like here. Similarly, to estimate the number of loans, the optimal number of loans screened by the P2P platform, we differentiate equation 2 with respect to KB, and we obtain an expression of this form. Okay, this is actually KB, so I'll make the correction right here. So if you equate this to 0, the differentiated equation, you get an expression like here. So you have two expressions here, this one and this one, and to derive a relationship between KA and KB, the number of loans processed by the bank and the share of loans processed by the P2P platform, all we have to do is subtract this expression from this one. So when you do this, this term cancels out, and what you're left with is lambda by 2 times KB minus KA. This is what you get here, and the common expression is R minus pi L. So this is on one side. On the other side, you get 2 times KAZA minus KBZB. All right. Once you push all the KA terms on one side and all the KB terms on the other side, you get an expression like this. Okay, and let's say we push this term to the other side, to the right hand side, we get an expression for the number of loans screened by the P2P platform, KB, as KA, the number of loans screened by the bank, times this big expression here. Do you notice something interesting within this expression expressed as equation 7? Because we assume that the screening costs borne by the bank are far higher than the screening costs borne by the P2P platform, what we can say from this expression is, since ZA greater than ZB, the number of loans, as long as that relationship holds, as long as this inequality holds, the number of loans screened by the P2P platform KB is always greater than the number of loans screened by the bank. And this is expected, right? And why is this possible? Because of the lower operating costs of the P2P platform. That in itself allows the P2P platform to screen a larger number of loan applications compared to the bank. Now, we can also try and express each of these terms, KB and KA, in terms of exogenous factors. How do we do that? We simply replace equation 7, in equation 6. I've shown the steps for this derivation in the scan PDF. So what we can do is replace equation 7 and equation 6, and once we do some simple arithmetic as a result, we end up with equation 8 expressed here. So we get an expression of KA, the number of loans screened by the bank, as expressed in exogenous factors, whether that's lambda, the share of low risk projects that are available, the deposit interest rate, the expected profit from a project, the screening costs of the bank and the platform. We treat them as exogenous because we assume that the bank or the P2P platform don't have direct control over any of these factors, right? Once we derive KA, we can put this expression into here. We can replace KA here with this, and we end up getting KB as equation 9. All right. Now, we can use these expressions to do a number of tests. We can try. These equations are actually interesting because they tell us how would this incentives of a bank and the P2P platform to screen loan applications change in response to changes in these exogenous factors. So for instance, let's say we are interested in understanding how would the costs of the bank, the incentives for the bank to screen loan applications change when its screening costs change. So for instance, this is interesting because let's say the bank faces more stringent regulation. So suddenly the bank faces Basel III, and that obviously because of the increased regulation, the screening cost borne by the bank also increased alongside. So the question here is, how does such a change in the screening cost for a bank impact its incentives to screen more loans, more loan applications? So we can understand this, we can try and understand this from this expression by differentiating KA with respect to ZA. So when we do this, and again, this is a simple expression and it's quite easy to differentiate this term. So as econ students who have substantial mathematical skills, I presume that it's pretty straightforward for you to derive or differentiate equation 8 with respect to ZA. So once you differentiate this expression, you get this equation. So you get this result. And if you look closer, what does this tell you? R represents the deposit interest rate. Okay. Pi L represents the expected profit that the bank earns from the project. Now the bank will obviously only lend if it expects to make more profit compared to the interest rate it pays out to its depositors. So what is the sign of this expression? It's negative. And obviously because lambda is between 0 and 1, this term is smaller than this term, and the collection of these two terms is actually negative. So the end result is the whole partial derivative of KA with respect to ZA is negative. What does that suggest? It tells us that a rise in screening costs for the bank in fact reduces its incentive to screen more loans. But on the other hand, it also encourages the bank, it also encourages this P2P platform to screen and issue more loans. How can we analyze this? Well, we'll simply plot the screening incentives of a bank expressed as K, and how it changes. We'll plot how the screening incentives of a bank and the P2P platform change in response to changes in the economic outlook, meaning changes in the share of lambda, the low risk projects within the economy. The blue line here represents the screening, the share of loans screened by the bank in the first model, when the bank was the only player in the market in a monopolistic situation. If you look at that expression there, you can clearly see that as lambda increases, the bank's propensity to screen naturally increases alongside, and it is a straight line. Nothing surprising here. What about the second model, when the bank is competing effectively with the P2P platform? In that situation, we can see that as lambda improves up to a certain level, both the bank and the P2P platform have an incentive to screen more loans and probably issue more loans as well. But after a certain threshold, the expressions tell us that the bank's incentive to screen more loans falls after a certain threshold, whereas the P2P platform reaches the maximum level possible. Why is that happening? The main reason here for why it's happening is because of this inequality. Because the bank faces higher screening costs per loan application compared to the P2P lender, what happens is, because of this expression K square Z, what does that suggest? What does this suggest? As the number of loan applications increases, the bank's screening cost increases substantially compared to the screening costs faced by the P2P platform. And therefore what happens is its incentives to screen more loans drops after a certain threshold. Whereas the P2P platform, because it has much lower operating costs, is able to capture a bigger and bigger share of the market. So these models tell us that because P2P platforms have lower operating costs, they are in a much more advantageous position to attract borrowers by screening loan applications more quickly and possibly issuing loans to a bigger set of borrowers, right? So having said this, I hope you find these models interesting. As I said, I'll put this working paper from which these models come from on MIT-UIB. The two models we discussed here are under an environment of perfect screening, so where the bank and the P2P platform are able to assess the quality of a project with certainty. But in the second part of the paper, the authors also show how these incentives change when the intermediaries in the market face imperfect screening, so where they are not able to determine the quality of a project with certainty. So if you're interested, please have a look at that part of the paper as well, and it's quite interesting. So, and I'm pretty sure you'll learn a lot from it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Once again, I thank you for your patience and understanding. I'm very sorry for not being able to deliver the lecture to you in a more interactive manner. Again, as I said, I'll put the scanned PDFs for some of these derivations online. Please have a look at it at your convenience. And if you have any further questions, you're welcome to contact me at any time. And I'll try to reach out to you as soon as possible. And as I said, I remain committed to helping you understand all aspects of fintech to the fullest extent possible. And I hope you will enjoy the forthcoming lectures as well, as much as I did. So thank you so much. I wish you a good rest of the week, and I also wish you good health and success. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.